Test, test. Welcome. Yeah. Okay, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you. Um, Again, we meet here in our Brownbag series with me, Nia Deliana. Today we are beyond, grateful to be able to be, hearing from a prominent scholar, Associate Professor Zulfan Tajuddin, um, who is, lecturer. He's not only a lecturer, researcher, but also, prominent advisor and consultant, not only for the Indonesian government, but also international institutions. Yeah, he writes, he's an expert commentaries for numerous media such as, The Diplomat, The Economist, and ABC News, even, um, um, uh, take his expertise and advice. So he has been, he was bestowed a grant to be a visiting researcher at the Queen Elizabeth House in the University of Oxford, and also at the International Institute of Social Sciences in Amsterdam. Yeah, Erasmus University of Amsterdam. And yeah, he has published two books, both by Macmillan Palgrave, and titled, about employment and reindustrialization in post-Suharto era, and another one is titled Explaining Collective Violence in Contemporary Indonesia. So yeah, without further ado, let's just hear Pak Zulfan. Today we'll give a talk about conflicts and cooperation, theories and applications for Indonesia and beyond. So the space and time is yours, Pak Zulfan.
Thank you, Bunia. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, actually, I was ordered to talk about conflict. I didn't plan for that one. This is kind of a distance memory for me, so I have to renew my own memories about this one. So this is not really up to date, but my intentions to bring this one to the table is probably more to entertain the master students. So for those established in Indonesian academics, probably you will find this one a bit outdated, but I'm sorry for that one. But for the youngsters, the MA student from economics, from political science, probably this is relevant for you. And I add the title Indonesia and beyond to make it relevant. So we have to make ourselves relevant all the time. Otherwise, we'll be out of the picture. So this is a kind of survival strategy. Okay, let me introduce a little bit of my university. This is the central office of the university, Western Sydney University. And then last year, the university was very proud of being ranked #1 in terms of commitment to fulfilling the SDGs. Overall, the university is already in the 250, what we missed the top 100, and so that's why we are not in the good positions to attract LPDP, so top 2% in the world. Okay, this is the structure of the talk. The first one is about conflict and cooperations. We start a little bit about the theory, and then we see how the theory can be applied to Indonesia, and then we see what can be learned to look at things beyond Indonesia. First one, let's start with very basic philosophical starting point. This is one of the initial theoretical formulations of conflict theory by an economist. Two ways of making a living. This is a very well-known paper by Jack Hischlever in the Journal of Political Economy. Only two ways, no third way. The first one is you produce. If you can imagine in the traditional society, you grow wheat and then you eat. That's the first way to make a living. And there is a second way. You don't want to grow, too dirty for you to grow wheat, and then what you can do? You steal. You steal someone else's produce. We call it in the academia predations. Either productions or predations. For productions, you need productions technology. That's one big subject. If you don't want to produce for whatever reason, you want to predate, you want to just to steal, you need also the technology. How do we understand this one in the modern world? So many jobs, so many skills that you can learn to do predations in the financial sector, in the bureaucracy, in everything, in the businesses. You don't produce, but you predate, predations. So we call that one as conflict technology. So you can see now the difference. One is the peaceful way, the second one is the violent way. But even you choose productions, you are the good man, yeah? You don't want to steal, you want to produce, but you still have to secure what you produce. You will be fooled not to secure what you produce. It means that you have to prepare yourself to defend what you produce. You have to ready to fight. So what does it mean? The meaning is conflict or violence actually embedded in the life of human being. From the traditional way of understanding the livelihood to the modern way of understanding professions. So that's the initial basic theory. Now, let's look at what conflict or violence we are talking about. Let's start with the big one. We ignore for the moment the smaller ones. The first one is at the state domain. We start with secessionist conflict or revolutions. Secessionist is when a part of in a country want to be out from the federations, want to secede, you want to break away. And second one is you don't want to break away, but you want to change the whole model of the country. We call it revolutions. Yeah. So if you think of conflict in Nepal, that one is revolutions, Maoist revolutions. If you think of uh, Xinjiang in China, Uyghur in China, they want to secede from China. So different between secessionists and revolutions. That's the first one, using the state domain. The second one is at the society, purely society domain, we call it ethnic violence or ethnic conflict. So of course, you will find ethnic dimensions in the first one. Then, what is the theory? This is the theory. The theory is very simple. You start with conflict or violence, the big one. And then, based on the development of the literature for the past 20 years, 20, 25 years, there are two competing arguments to explain conflict. One is because of people are greedy. The second one, because of they have grievances. So greed and grievance. So greed is basically loot-seeking motivations. You want to grab something because of your greedy. Then grievance is you are dissatisfied. You complain. So this is we call uh, justice-seeking motivation. So loot-seeking motivations versus justice-seeking motivations. And if we go back to the during the turn of the millennium, the proponent of this one is his name is Professor Paul Collier in the Department of Economics of Oxford, and the proponent of this one, another professor within the same department, Francis Seward. The other one is this one is associated with the World Bank, and Francis was associated with the UN. And then you can think of a kind of contradictions in terms of the worldview of thing between the UN and the World Bank. And that's reflected in the academia. And as you can imagine that Paul Collier's research was sponsored by the World Bank and Francis Seward research was sponsored by the UN. And then, but we have a synthesis of these two. We say that Greed alone or grievance alone will not be sufficient. In fact, in reality, we will find that one coexists. You see greed, you see grievance, basically difficult to separate. So, what is the enabling conditions for the outbreak of civil war or major ethnic conflict? This is what the additions. We call it the breakdown of social contract. So, greed alone or greed plus grievance, when the social contract is intact, that will be okay. But when the social contract broke, that will be the enabling conditions for the big scale conflict to take place. So that's how we explain conflict. And then conflict will not happen in just one episode. You will see what we call repeated games. So the basic idea of repeated games, we can go back to the battle of the sexes. Husband and wife, two different kind of human being, female and male and female. And then you will not find anywhere in the world 100% harmony between husband and wife. You will not find that one. They always fight, or couple, whatever. Battle, we call it battle of the sexes. But in reality, what happened? They exercise their power. But after exercising the power, doing here and there, and then after all, after exercising their power, they will come to the conclusions that cooperations will be better than keep fighting. Because when they fight, they will be in any of this one, zero sum or lose-lose situations. Very unlikely zero sum, in most cases, lose-lose situations. There will be no win-win solutions. And then what will be the outcome? Oh, sorry. The outcome is they have to cooperate after all. After experiencing the so-called repeated games, they realize that cooperation is better, and then you see here the breakdown of social contract will transform into the building of a new social contract. But when you break the old one, you want to develop a new one, there will be some time. This is where you exercise the so-called repeated games. So this is basically the simplified theory here. Now, what is social contract? Again, we have to go back to Jack Hirschlefer. There are two kinds of social contract. The first one is vertical, dating back to the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who was the proponent or giving the intellectual foundations of dictatorships or absolute monarchy. Hobbes lives, he was born in late 1500s till mid 1600s, a bit older than John Locke, the next English philosopher. So vertical social contract is basically the autocratic social contract. And then, in most cases, societies in the world transform from autocratic setting into democratic setting. In limited cases, you will find the reverse, from democracy to dictatorships. But overall, the trajectory is very clear, from autocratic setting to democratic setting. And then we have the second kind of social contract. We call it horizontal social contract. The philosophy goes back to John Locke. John Locke is basically lives during the period of British Enlightenment, and then a kind of has been called the father of liberalism, if I'm not mistaken, John Locke. Yeah. And Hobbes was the intellectual, giving intellectual foundations for absolute monarchy. So we have to understand the logic here, rather than to laugh about this one in the half a millennium after. Look at here. Hobbes compared the stability of autocracy compared to anarchy. So in the state of anarchy, where each man taking what he can with no legal basis for right or wrong, that's anarchy. In that situations, it was in the interest of the society to surrender their freedom to an absolute authority or monarch in return for security, avoiding constant anarchy and war. So we have to be sympathetic with the logic offered by Thomas Hobbes. Because the alternative to the vertical social contract is the state of war or the state of anarchy. So this is also one reason saying that 1 year of bad government is still better than 1 day without a government. I think we heard that one. Yeah. So that's the understanding of vertical social contract. Now let's look at the horizontal one. John Locke is a bit younger than Hobbes, and then horizontal social contract is basically social contract based on the consent of those rules, and the ruler will have to exercise the contract with the consent. Because the right to life and property should be regarded as a natural right which existed in the state of nature. So this corresponds to the more egalitarian regimen by greater degree of consent advocated by John Locke. So this is democratic setting. So that's basically the theory. Uh, the old vertical social contract, it has to break, and then that will have to find a new equilibrium, which is called horizontal social contract. And then in between, that will facilitate the outbreak of conflict and violence. Now let's look at Indonesia. We are referring to the transitions period of Indonesia. You know that those of you who have been here for the past 1 year, you know that Indonesia was ruled by the autocratic government between mid-60s to late 90s, and then after the Asian crisis, Indonesia transitions to democracy, and then since then, Indonesia has been consolidating their democracy. So, but during the transitions, after the collapse of the previous authoritarian government, before the new democratic and decentralized Indonesia consolidate, there was a period of uncertainty, probably kind of anarchy for somehow. And then at that time, Indonesia suffered from the secessionist conflict and also ethnic conflicts. Let's look at this one quickly. This is the spots for the secessionist aspirations in Indonesia in late 90s, early 2000. This is to show you that those four hotspots, they are rich in the natural resources. Before, the country adopt the so-called equalization policy, basically the oil there does not only belong to the people there, it has to be enjoyed by the whole Indonesians. And then the autocratic government was very well known, in fact, for the equalization policy. But the equalization policy was done by force, not by consent. That was the problem. And then I'll skip this one, but the idea here is how to explain the secessionist conflict in Indonesia using the idea of greed and grievance, and then the breakdown of the social contract. So basically what happened was, in those four regions, they suffer from the sense of relative deprivations for being rich, endowed with the natural resources, but their socio-economic welfare were not significantly different from the rest of Indonesia. So this is what we call before as aspirations to inequality, and then the phenomena can be called the rich of the potentially rich. They are not richer than the rest of Indonesia, but they increasingly know that they produce natural resources, oil, gas, mining, whatever. But so that's what they are thinking. The anger of not significantly different in terms of socioeconomic status compared to their regional wealth. So here we have to differentiate regional prosperity and community prosperity. And then when we understand that one element of greed is there, or element of greed is there, but at the same time, element of grievance, sorry, but at the same time, you will find also element of greed, of not willing to share the resource range with other regions. So our oil should be for us. Our gold should be for us. Our gas should be for us. We have shared this one for 30 years. Now, where is our share? So this is the combinations of greed and grievance. So here is one example to show that greed and grievance eventually inseparable. Now, when you look at Indonesia in 1999, it was the period of the breakdown of social contract. East Timor was just gone. Yeah. It was a kind of the impetus for the bigger sentiment. And then it was said in 1999, 2000, around that time, the early phase of the transition, Indonesia was said in the brink of territorial disintegrations, a potential Balkan of Southeast Asia. It was scary if you think of the situations during that time. And if we look at the literature, this is what is referred to by two prominent scholars, three. The first one is Jacques Bertrand from University of Toronto, if not mistaken. Jacques Bertrand called that one as the period of critical juncture. And the next scholar is Hank School Northolt and Jerry Van Klinken. They put the title for their book about the local politics in Indonesia as renegotiating boundaries. So you can imagine that during the breakdown of the social contract, it was the period of critical juncture, and it was the time for renegotiating the boundaries, any kinds of boundaries, inter-ethnic boundaries, the boundaries between the relationship between the center and regions. So they renegotiate. When you renegotiate, you flex your muscle. You want to gain. After all, you want to gain more. How to gain more? Flex your muscle. So that's what happened actually. Everyone is flexing the muscle in the context of center regions and in the context of inter-ethnic conflict. Very simple. Then what happened? Okay, this is what happened for the ethnic violence. Peak between the period of for 5 years, 1997, 2002, in total claimed 10,000 lives. How do we see 10,000 lives? It's relative. If you compare that one with bigger number, that's small. But if you look at from other perspective, that's too much. But it was there. That's the price that has been paid by Indonesia for moving from the previous social contract to the new one. And then this is the spots for the ethnic violence during that time. And then this is the how we read, how we use the theory to explain the ethnic conflict. So grievance is basically this is from the database that UNSFIR at the time developed before the more famous World Bank database. This is how we can put the theory here, the conflict, repeated games, and cooperations. Grievance. It was basically about the relative deprivations of the previously superior group who lose their superior positions due to the inter-ethnic convergence. So if you look at the new order, what happened in Indonesia was convergence across ethnic groups, not divergence. And conflict theory will say that it was the divergence that will create relative deprivations. So from that perspective, I'm a bit different from Francis Stewart hypothesis saying that ethnic divergence can cause the grievances. But in the case of Indonesia, we can say that it was ethnic convergence that create grievances. Grievances from whom? From those who were previously in the superior positions. They are still superior, but how far they are superior from their rival ethnic group is closer. So that's why we call it relative. Yeah. So the relative deprivations of the previously superior group losing their superiority, their superior positions due to the inter-ethnic convergence. So that's one dimension. Then at the same time, that kind of feeling also reflect greed for not willing to lose their superior positions. So how do we understand greed? How do we understand grievance? This is a matter of perspective then. At one point it is a grievance. On the other point, it is greed. Remember that in social science, when we develop a concept, it has to follow the rigid boundary that we set for that formulations. When we change the boundary, we shift the perspective, that could be completely different. So this is something in political science and social science that we need to be aware of. And then how the breakdown of the social contract actually create the conditions for those ethnic groups in different regions to flex their muscle. So the transition it was during the boundaries were negotiated in the sense that Indonesia was democratized, and Indonesia was about to be decentralized. What is the meaning of decentralizations? The redistributions of power and resources from the center to regions. So meaning that people in the regions were ready to receive the spillover of resources and power. And then there are different ethnic groups. So everyone will have to flex their muscle. That's the way we understand, we apply this kind of theory. And then conflict in the repeated games. So in the context of Center region, they exercise hated relationship between Riau and Jakarta, East Kalimantan and Jakarta, renewed secessionist struggle in Aceh, and renewed struggle in Papua. So that's why Indonesia was said in the brink of disintegrations. So they exercise the power. The longest one who exercised the power was Aceh, yeah, only resolved in 2005. From the re-emergence of the new rebellion in late 90s, it was in 97, 98. So it was about uh, 8 years of civil war before the peace agreement in 2005. And you can imagine that during the peace agreement, basically the rebel group has tired, and also the central government has also tired of fighting. So when you tired, what is the best way? Let's find the best way for us to walk away from the conflict with your head stand, uh, uh, not anyone will lose their face. So what is the best way to go? Go to the negotiation table. So without you are losing the energy, yeah, one is the rebel group understand that no way for them can defeat the Indonesian army. And the Indonesian army also understand that no way for them to 100% crush the rebel. Even even Canada cannot crush the secessionist aspirations in Quebec up until now. Even in Spain, the Catalonian secessionist aspirations is still alive. So it's impossible to make it zero. Even China now. So they exercise that one in repeated games, and then they come to conclusions that cooperation is better. The same with the case of inter-ethnic group. After exercising, flexing their muscle, and then they cooperate. The question is how they cooperate. So they realize that in the repeated games, violent conflict only result in lose-lose situations. Now, better to cooperate. But the question is how they cooperate. Now, we need to look at more detailed arrangement of the new social contract. Cooperations after conflict. In the context of center-regional conflict, it was decentralizations. We need to understand decentralizations in broad spectrum, not just in one short policy. Quick for East Kalimantan and Riau, a bit long for Papua, much longer for Aceh. But the construct is basically decentralizations. What about for inter-ethnic coalitions? It was the local democracy that facilitated cooperations rather than conflict. So you will find the Christian governor in Maluku will team up with the Muslim vice governor. The Malay governor in central Kalimantan will team up with the rival Dayak representative as the vice governor. So that kind of model was universally found in the practice of direct local democracy, local elections in Indonesia at the province level and also at the district level. So when it was not by design, it was not realized by the introductions of local democracy, or because we can say that the direct local elections is the peak of political decentralization in Indonesia. It was not, it was a kind of unanticipated benefit of that kind of model. So that's how they cooperate in the context of decentralizations and the local democracy within the overall democratizations of Indonesia. So the cooperation is facilitated by the new social contract of the democratic and decentralized Indonesia. So that's the conclusions. Now, let's discuss beyond. But before we talk about the beyond aspect, let's summarize where is Indonesia now. Before we talk about Indonesia 20 years ago, yeah, Indonesia between 97 till 2005. Now, this is where is Indonesia. On the first one, about the territorial integrity. This is my own take on this one. Based on my reading, and probably somehow complicated by my own personal bias as an Indonesian, and also my own personal understanding of what is the meaning of Indonesia, I think this is my own prepositions. Now, we can say that territorial integrity of Indonesia is very much intact. That's one conclusions that I want, or prepositions that I want to offer about how to look at Indonesia now. Second one, the risk of future major inter-ethnic violence is low. If we reflect on what we saw before in late 90s, early 2000, I don't think we are risking this kind of thing in the near future. I don't know in the medium and long term, but this is my understanding now. And I don't know, I read a couple of years ago, scholar of political science scholar concluding that Indonesia is the strongest democracy in Southeast Asia, the most stable democracy in Southeast Asia. Probably I put a question mark there whether we can still call that one the strongest democracy in Southeast Asia. We have participants from the Philippines and other countries. Probably you can share your thoughts. And when imagine that you are standing now in the Arab world, you are from Yemen, from Syria, or from Iraq, or from Jordan, or you are from Tunisia, or you, let alone you are in sub-Saharan Africa. Indonesia is shining in terms of the state of current Indonesian democracy. So this is the conclusions that I have heard also for the past few years, that Indonesia democracy is resilient. Declining, yes, but resilient. But if you look at from inside, you have all sorts of complaint, dissatisfactions, but you need to balance that kind of view from a comparative perspective. And then another prepositions, not my prepositions, but this is a very academic prepositions, saying that democracy as a non-violent mechanism of conflict resolutions. But in other places, you will find that democracy is not serving what it should offer, but you have the very famous book by Jack Snyder called From Voting to Violence. So you vote and then you fight. Voting is basically to replace the fight. So, but the experience of Indonesia is a lot to learn from the experience of Indonesia. So this is where Indonesia now. Now, you look at what happened in India. Very quick. India was position was at odd when you read the modernization hypothesis linking economic development and political development. When they say that prosperity breeds democracy, what about India? India was very poor. Huh? After the end of colonialism, the transfer of power from the British, but they start the democracy right away and becoming resilient democracy for the rest of the history. So democracy in poor society, if you like, as to challenge the modernization hypothesis. But currently, democracy in India is in decline. It has been widely because of the rise of religious populism that facilitate or trigger inter-religious violence. And if you read the history of Hindu-Muslim violence in India, basically violence was used as electoral strategy to consolidate the vote for the Hindus majority. So from that perspective, India is still having problem of interreligious violence up until now, and the problem has been there since the British time, during the partitions, and also in the modern time. And then they still have several active secessionist movement in the country. So now up to you if you want to use that kind of simplified theory to understand India. And then if you think of Nepal, for example, the country suffered civil war for a decade, more than 17,000 casualties. So compare with the 10,000 in Indonesia, with the size of populations probably 10 times, not 10 times, probably 6, 7 times bigger than Nepal. So that's why numbers is always relative. Yeah. But what happened in Nepal was the rebel group agreed to sign a peace agreement, and then they agreed to participate in democracy, and then that the Maoists becoming the Nepal Communist Party, and then they participate in the elections, and then they won the elections. And the current prime minister of Nepal is from the Nepal Communist Party. So from that one, you can see that how democracy actually function as the non-violent mechanism of conflict resolutions. So this is what we call revolutions, not secessionism. Then you can think of Philippines, for example, where active Communist Party army is still there. And then also the problem in the southern secessionist sentiment in the southern Philippines has not been fully settled. So Philippines is multi-ethnic country, archipelagic country like Indonesia, roughly just the same country like Indonesia. So probably that will be also one interesting point to compare the problem of territorial integrity or conflict at the state level between Indonesia and the Philippines. Myanmar, You don't have to say Myanmar. When the coup happened in Myanmar, when you look at Myanmar, when you discuss about what happened in the Arab Spring, Indonesia was a shining example in that kind of discussions. And then, okay, you don't have to talk about Syria, Yemen, Libya, and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So my my last point here is this is a kind of simplified way of using the existing available piece of theory or framework. And then when we look at the Indonesian experience, and then we we assemble the simplified conflict, repeated games, and cooperations, and then we apply that one to Indonesia in the context of the breakdown of the previous social contract to build the new one, and then we have the simplified theory that can reasonably able to explain, to read the experience of Indonesia. And then when we want to try to find or to synthesize a new framework to see other cases, remember that in social science, theory will always be limited to the time horizon and territorial coverage. When you shift the time horizon and the territory, you need to domesticate that theory. So that's the challenge of the PhD student to be able to, if some of you are doing PhD now, to be able to domesticate. Nothing is ready to be used, to be borrowed. You have to contemplate to domesticate, to to develop a new versions of the theory applicable for your case. I'll end there. Thank you, Bunia.
Thank you, Pak Zulfan. That was very interesting presentation. It has been, like he said, simplified with the clear languages and kind of brief sentences where we can easily pinpoint what he's trying to say. And it is kind of, as a student from political science, maybe we have been exposed often on the material construct in doing research, right? But not so much on the immaterial things, just like Pak Zulfan has presented today. He highlights the grievances, right? The greed and cooperation. Just, and relying on the concepts and theories of social contracts and how he developed um, to see in the context of the metaphysical. I would call, when you call about grievances and greed and cooperation, it is just so amazing and relatable, especially for for people from the developing countries with all this kind of problems with secessionist and inter-ethnic yeah conflict. So yeah, I think we can open questions and answers sessions. If you have question, you can raise your hand, and we can you know give Azufan to give to respond. Anyone? Okay, we have Olga and Ali, so we can go from Ali first. I'll give you.
Thank you, bro, for your presentation. It was interesting topic. My question is about uh, in today or from after uh, uh, World War II. I think you know many of onset. If we skip minor conflict and focus with war, many many onset war actually encouraged by intervention by majoring power. We know about Cold War and many wars in that area, and also in the recent conflicts or civil wars specifically. Many of those were actually uh, encouraged by intervention by majoring power. So measuring power actually it's more than ethnic and its reason it's big reason that international system actually affected in the onset of this conflict in the war now. It's like in Yemen, Syria, and Libya. All of this actually affected by the international system and the measuring power. What do you think about this? Also, this reason. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pa Zulfan. I'm Olga from economics student. So my question is, what's your opinion, Pa, about the initiative to build IKN, Indo apa sih IKN? Indonesia, ibu kota, ibu kota Nusantara. So based on the news I heard, there was no information and socialization before to the community. So they just heard from the social media, and there was no hearing trail yet from the official government there. So can you explain it to me about how it does work from the conflict theory and grievance and the grid of the government? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not quite sure for the last questions. Okay. You need to look at the potential conflict caused by a major policy. When you identify the conflict, you have to identify the actor, who versus whom. And then you need to understand the what is at stake. Conflict is about what you will gain, right? What is at stake? So only after you can show the resulted conflict, because you cannot just assuming. So probably for me to be a bit too premature to try to step more on that one before the terrain can be described more clearly. So I think I will stay at that level. Okay, this is major policy that will create conflicting parties to exercise their muscle because of that policy to gain more. So this is the typical rational choice way of understanding the behavior of actors. So once you can explain that model or that pattern, and then you can use the greed and grievance. So the concept is very general, very general. So greed is the motivations to gain something out of the greediness. So that's we call it loot-seeking motivations. Then, if groups who will be on the losing side of a major policy, and then they identify who will gain more, then they will they will express the conflict or resentment. So you have to be able to show that one in the first place. So I think what I can offer here is the approach rather than how would I see that one, because it'll be too far for me to step into that one. I'm not going to step into the territory that I have no idea about. Okay, I think that's will be. I think that should be enough. For the first one, conflict is everywhere. So that's why you are referring to what is called the internationalized conflict. yes, you are right that during the Cold War, many conflict or even the revolutions in certain countries are basically the extensions of the Cold War rivalry. If you think of what happened in Indonesia in mid 60s, 500,000 people perish. The the fight between the right and left was really one of the shocking phenomena of during the Cold War, and it was basically the spillover. One factor was Cold War rivalry, but as you know that when you see a major conflict, everything under the sun will contribute. Very difficult to single out just one and then you put the burden on that factor. That will not happen. Even if you want to explain economic growth, something that is more tangible, everything under the sun will contribute. You cannot just isolate this. This growth is because of A, let alone a social phenomena like war and conflict or civil war. So you are referring to the what is called the internationalized conflict, but what you can look during the when the stake is high during the civil war was at the peak. You can see that the several cases happened. But the peak of civil war around the world, if you look at the Uppsala Prio civil war data set, the civil war actually reached the peak after the Cold War, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the period between early 90s till for the next probably 15, 20 years, the more incidents happen. The same is happening in Indonesia. If you think of the stability of New Order regime, the stability was supported by the interest of the U.S. But what happened after 96, after the collapse of the Soviet Union? The interest of the U.S. is not there anymore. The same with Iraq. When the interest of the U.S. has been achieved there, they run away. They leave the anarchy. This happened in Afghanistan. So the model is quite similar, by the way. So now you have to be able to limit your observations. Of course, the theory that I offer will not be able to reach out the global rivalry of superpower. No, that will not happen there. I don't think the theory will be sufficient enough to understand that one. But if you want to look at the conflict within country that purely domestic rather than influenced by the great powers, this kind of theory probably can be borrowed and can be modified. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Pak Zulfan. Okay, we have the next question from Audin. Philip J. Vermonte. Yeah, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Tajuddin, for your presentation. I'm just curious if we are referring to democracy as a non-violent mechanism to solve conflicts, but at the same time, you are also referring to the situation in India that has the same democracy, but right now they are uh, facing a serious problem of what a social contract, so to speak. Now, in your research, maybe you can point us to something that if we zoom in to about this democracy that solve conflicts, right? Because sometimes democracy, as you refer to Jack Snyder's book, that it also causes conflict. So maybe within the democracy itself, whether the judicial system that can help, or in terms of constitution, or electoral system, or other arrangement within the same democracies that actually cause conflicts to cease or conflict to continue. Maybe you can shed some lights on this.
This is a PhD project, by the way. You can have it. You can you can organize PhD dissertations along this idea. As I believe that this is just random thoughts, if you like. I don't think I have a confidence on this one, but let me try to entertain this kind of discussions. Democracy now is in decline everywhere. In the US, democracy is declining. In the UK, democracy is in decline. In every countries. If you look at what happened in the major democracies, the culprit was the rise of right-wing populism. What happened in the Western world? White supremacists. The same model to explain Brexit, the same model to explain the rise of Trump. And those countries are struggling to overcome their own problem. And then we are talking about the decay in democracy. Australia is basically where I have been living for the past 15 years. I can see the same trend. But luckily, because of the different structural setting of Australian society compared to the British society, compared to American society, that kind of trend is not gaining sufficient ground to rule the country. And I don't think that kind of trend will succeed in the near future. So you can imagine that as Muslim, as Asian, living in the white majority country, I openly said to my student, when I read what happened in the UK for the past 10 years, since the global financial crisis, what happened in the US, I feel very lucky to live as a minority, as Asian, as Muslim in Australia with my family. Because of so we need to look back into the economic structure here, about inequality, about the distributions, about that one. That will help to explain this one. So overall, in the developed democracies, in the Western world, democracy is in decline, and the source of the decline was the rise of right-wing populism in the sense of white supremacists. And what happened in the developing world? It, in the developing world, in the democracies in the developing world, you will find also the same thing: the rise of right-wing populism in different forms. In India, you will find the religious Hindu nationalism succeed in putting Narendra Modi into the seat of the prime minister. And in Indonesia, you will see the rise of Islamic populism, and they are still trying to succeed in India. So you can imagine that the implications of if the right-wing populism managed to democratically win or hold the power. We look at India. India is our future. So I think I think the problem here is the history has told us that we are not moving from democracy to autocracy. The global history, the global data for the past 100 years, we are moving from from autocracy to democracy. But the problem is not the problem, the hope. The hope is when autocracy decay, when you have problem with the autocracy, you can have good autocracy. Autocracy that protect civil rights. Autocracy that provide social welfare. Autocracy that offer economic growth. Autocracy that offer prosperity. You have Singapore. They are, we call it happy autocracy. no one to have instability in Singapore. So, but when you have problem with autocracy, the choice is to abolish the autocracy in most cases, then to try another one. But in the case of democracy, I don't know whether this kind of wisdom is how valid is this wisdom. But it seems like when you are with democracy, democracy is a system that have the capacity to repair their own damage. That's my understanding. So the question for the Western world is they will have to reinvent their democracy. And also for countries like India, India will have to reinvent their democracy. They are not, they are not deficiency of thoughts, of talent, of experience. So now up to them. No one can rule India. India is a very dignified country standing against the other countries who will try to be dominant. Now they will say they will stand tall. So up to them to reinvent the democracy. The same with Indonesia. And now we are not living. Now we are entering the new era of the rivalry between the US and China, and then probably if we are going to have the new Cold War, that's the next one that the world is heading. Uh, I don't know, but after all, probably the wisdom that I can think of is each and every country will have to find the best way for them, the best way. So I think this is the battle for Indonesia, the battle for India, even the battle for the US and for the UK. This is difficult things to respond.
Okay, thank you, Pak Zulfan. That is like having a conversation, direct between both of experts, and we have gained like so many important insights from there. So we have the last question from Magello, Philippines.
Hello, interesting presentation, Professor Zulfan. So my question is stemmed from the logic of grievances and greed, as stated earlier. If both the state and the rebel group, let's say the secessionist movement, those are their motivations, respectively. So how can we test the genuineness of those agendas in the in the negotiation table, especially that you said that both of the parties can be just flexing their muscles, right? So how can we test the genuineness of their agendas in the table? So that's my first question, especially that the state has its own interest, and also you cannot expect the militias to just to put down their guns in the sense that they will just agree. Partially it's just part of their long-term agenda that they will agree with these peace talks, but when the time that they get this higher membership, they will still rise up against the status quo. So that is my first question. Second question, I'm just curious about the case of Riau and Aceh. I'm not really well knowledgeable about that cases, but I just want to know in the time of the negotiation panel, where did it happen? Like where is the negotiation table? Because as far as I know, when the state and the insurgent movements are handling these talks, it is usually happening in a neutral ground. So I'm just curious where did it took place? Thank you.
This is also very substantive questions. On the first one, something that I forgot to mention. So at the state level, when you think of the state, the rebels, there is the so-called carrot and stick. And carrot and stick will have to to be used simultaneously. On the one hand, you offer the carrot to address the grievance or to address the griefs, but at the same time, stick is also important to enforce the carrot. So now we are talking about the credible game. How credible, how powerful. So this is will be unique for each cases. But you will find, if you shop the literature, you will find about the commitment, credibility in negotiations, and you will find what can contribute to the not credible. One thing that one reference that I remember now is hard negotiations is good negotiations. Hard talk is good talk. But if you can reach negotiation easily, when the talk is easy, it means that that will not be binding. So this is the difference between cheap talk and hard talk. So now, if I can, what I can tell about the experience of the Indonesian government dealing with rebellion in Aceh, it was a very long process. Stick and carrot. Yeah. Come on, you can imagine that 50,000 strong army sent to Aceh, a province of only 5 million people, by a country with 500,000 strong army. So if 500,000 and 50,000, that it means that 10% of the of the of the capacity was allocated to that region. Even then, no way to 100% crush the rebellion, because rebellion will have also the immaterial uh, 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 soul. So here is how to find the middle ground. And what I can understand now about the arrangement is this is about the how you can walk away from the situations with dignity. The central government has the dignity. The rebel group, they have also the dignity. Everyone is happy. And then this is the outcome. Not ideal. Nothing is ideal. So in the context of your questions, you can learn from the successful example, because if you look at the experience of Indonesia dealing with Aceh, that will be the best comparison of the Philippine government dealing with Mindanao, for example, and with other rebel group. But here is about commitment, about carrot and stick, and how serious is the carrot and how serious is the stick. Stick and carrot will have to be combined. I was naive before. I remember that in the early 2000, I said that military solutions is not the solutions. I said that as, but I was criticized by my mentor. Come on, think twice. It has to be part of the option. So up to you now. But I think I can understand now when I said that military options is not the solutions. That was my title in the title of my article in Jakarta Post. I was criticized by one of my senior. Come on, don't be silly. What do you understand? So as you understand that when we know less, we have the confidence of to say something. When you know more, you will withdraw that kind of statement probably. So I learned from your statement. So, okay, I think this should be enough, Majlo. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir, for giving me the time. I'm Navidullah from Afghanistan, new student here at the Political Science Department. I think my question is a little different. I want to ask you about the religious conflict in all over the world. when we see in all over the world there is conflict in the Muslim country, mostly happen at the Muslim countries like Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, or other Islamic countries. Uh, my question is, according your views, what is behind this tragedy? Why there is conflict since more years in all over the world between Muslim countries, and mostly happen the war and conflict here. In even no organization came to solve the problem in discussion about it. Thank you.
I think this is related to the rise of exclusive interpretations of religion. And exclusive interpretations of religion is not unique to Islam. But unfortunately, if we look at what happened for the past few decades, the label has been there for Islam. But if we read the literature, the exclusive interpretations of religion is not unique to Islam. That happened everywhere. So I think I remember one book titled uh, "Killing in the Name of God," something like that. I forgot something, "Killing in the Name of God," or something like that. So this will offer you a more general, more comprehensive understanding of that. But you are right. Let me reflect on Afghanistan. Uh, 2 years ago or last year, referring to the fall of Kabul. And the fall of Kabul was cheered up in Indonesia by quite significant segment of the society. They have the imaginations of having that kind of thing happen in Indonesia, the fall of Kabul. So you will find the resonance of that kind of trend in other Muslim countries. And then if, yeah, I'm not, I don't think I have the authority to talk about this one, but my own reading is this is about the rise of the strict interpretations of Islam, and you will find the similarities, the internationalizations of that kind of idea from Afghanistan to Yemen uh, to other countries. So, and then this one is complicated by the external powers wanting to utilize that one to, this is about global power setting. So this is about, nothing is purely local, nothing is purely international here, always the combinations. But my understanding is the country will have to solve their own problem. That's the only way to go. So how strong they are in solving their problem, how good they are coming to the consensus, I think that will be the key. But just to share on this one, probably 2 months ago, I was asked by the Hazaras community in Sydney. They commemorate the. What is your ethnic background in Afghanistan? If I can ask.
What?
What is your ethnic background? Are you Pashtun or Hazaras?
No, no, I'm not Pashtun. I'm Pashtun. I'm
Oh,
related to Pashtun. Yeah,
you are Pashtun.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You know Hazaras, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
And
As
then
I said,
most of the Afghans living in Australia, they are the Hazaras.
yeah.
They are the most persecuted ethnic group in Afghanistan. They are Hazaras, look different from the Afghan majority. They are Shia compared to the majority Sunnis. They are the most persecuted. So I was invited to speak in their event of commemorating the Hazaras genocide 100 years ago. And then I just offer the experience of Indonesia of having or developing or building what is called civic nationalism on top of so many ethnic groups and so many religions. So from that perspective, a lot to be learned from Indonesia. But in Afghanistan, they don't have the Afghan nationalism. They have the Pashtun nationalism. They have the Hazaras nationalism. They have the Tajik nationalism. But they don't have the experience. But they are the fighters. They are the good fighters. So, so after all, each and every society will have to solve their own problem within their own boundary. I think if I can offer a little bit of experience with a little bit of my reading on Afghanistan.
Okay. That today is, I think, a blast for all of us. Yeah, to be able to hear um from an advisor, international caliber on conflict and cooperation. So I think we have to end our program today. And if you have some extra question, you can just come and meet him and ask you directly. While he's here, because he's gonna be with us like for 1 year. Well, he will be on campus, but you know, not every day like me. So yeah, just grab your chance. Okay, thank you so much for coming. See you again for in the next upcoming Brownbag series talk. Applause. Yeah.